Imagine a young, simple woman, an orphan, living in a foreign land without imagining that her destiny would change the history of an entire nation. Esther, an ordinary Jewish girl in the vast Persian Empire, was chosen to live an extraordinary life. Suddenly, she is taken to the royal palace, where her life completely changes as she becomes queen. But it wasn't just her beauty that won the king's heart. Esther would face a choice that could cost her life: risk everything to save her people from destruction, or remain silent in the comfort of her position. What made such an unlikely young woman stand out in a foreign kingdom? How did she gather the courage to face the powerful king and the dangerous plot of a treacherous enemy? So, stay until the end of this video to understand one of the most incredible and inspiring narratives of the Bible, full of twists and powerful lessons that resonate even today. The story of Esther is one of the most remarkable in the Bible, hard to forget. Esther was a young Jewish woman, an orphan, living as an exile in Persia. But something extraordinary happened. She became the wife of the most powerful king of that time. More than that, Esther played a crucial role in God's plan to save his people. Her story teaches us how God can use anyone to accomplish amazing things. At that time, the Jewish people were in grave danger, facing the threat of complete extermination. But how did this happen? How did a simple young woman of humble origin manage to become the Queen of Persia and live a story so powerful that it continues to inspire to this day? And why is her story known only through the Bible and not found in other historical records of the Persian Empire? In this video, you will discover everything about Esther, her courage, her faith, and the valuable lessons her life leaves us. And to understand the impact of her actions, it is important to know the historical context of the moment she lived. It all began when Jerusalem was invaded by King Nebuchadnezzar, and many Jews were taken as prisoners to the Babylonian Empire. Among these exiles was a distant relative of Esther, who was taken along with Jehoiakim, the king of Judah at that time. Years later, Babylon was conquered by the Medes and Persians, forming the great Persian Empire, where Esther's story unfolds. The Persian Empire had important leaders, such as Cyrus the Great, his grandson Darius I, and Xerxes I, known in the Bible as Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus ruled the empire between 486 and 465 before Christ, the period during which Esther lived. He was considered a very powerful and resolute king. At that time, the Persian Empire was immense, stretching from India to Ethiopia with 127 provinces. As mentioned in the Bible, approximately 100 million people lived under Persian rule, including around 3 million Jews. The story of Esther took place in Susa, one of the main cities of the Persian Empire. This city was an important administrative center and also served as the winter residence of King Ahasuerus, who had a luxurious palace there. It all began when the king gathered his nobles, military leaders, and governors of the provinces for a grand display of power. For 180 days, he showcased all the wealth and grandeur of his empire. Afterward, Ahasuerus hosted a 7-day feast for all the inhabitants of Susa, further displaying the kingdom's luxury. Some scholars believe this event occurred during the 3rd year of Ahasuerus's reign, as he prepared for a military campaign against Greece. During this feast, the Bible mentions that the king held banquets for his princes and officials, while his wife, Queen Vashti, organized a separate celebration for the women in the palace. At a certain point, Ahasuerus requested that Vashti come to him wearing the royal crown so that everyone could admire her beauty. However, Vashti refused, perhaps considering the request disrespectful. Because of this, the king decided to remove Vashti from her position as queen, opening the way for a new queen to enter the palace. After King Ahasuerus' anger subsided, he may have started to miss Queen Vashti. To resolve this, his advisors suggested gathering the most beautiful young women from the kingdom so the king could choose a new queen. Among these young women was Hadassah, a young Jewish orphan. Her Hebrew name, Hadassah, means myrtle, a type of plant. She was the daughter of Abihail and was raised by her cousin Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin. Hadassah was also called Esther, probably her Persian name. She lived torn between two worlds, her Jewish faith and the culture of the city of Susa. The name Esther may mean star, but some believe it is also connected to the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. The Bible describes Esther as a very beautiful woman. Her beauty was so great that she was chosen among the most attractive young women in the kingdom to appear before the king. Before this, Esther underwent a beauty treatment that lasted 1 year. The young women could only return to the king's presence if he called them by name. And that is what happened with Esther. The king liked her more than all the others and chose her as his new queen, captivated by her beauty and grace. The favor Esther gained was very important for her survival in the Persian court, and the Bible shows that it was all part of God's plans. She was crowned queen in place of Vashti, and King Ahasuerus celebrated the occasion with a great banquet for the nobles and officials of the kingdom. Vashti was removed in the 3rd year of Ahasuerus' reign, but Esther was only presented to the king in the 7th year. This means about 4 years passed between Vashti's removal and Esther's coronation. During this time, God was preparing Esther to fulfill a very important role in the history of the Jewish people. After becoming queen, Esther, together with her cousin Mordecai, managed to prevent a conspiracy to assassinate King Ahasuerus. However, the story takes a new turn when Haman, a man who became one of the empire's leading ministers, enters the scene. He is described as an Agagite, possibly a descendant of the Amalekites, ancient enemies of Israel. The Bible recounts that Haman was promoted by King Ahasuerus to a very important position, ranking above all the other princes of Persia. Because of this, all the king's servants who worked at the palace gate had to bow before Haman. However, Mordecai, Queen Esther's cousin, refused to do so. This attitude deeply offended Haman and wounded his pride. Haman's anger toward Mordecai grew so much that he began to hate all the Jewish people. He decided that punishing Mordecai alone was not enough, and planned to destroy all the Jews in the Persian Empire. Haman convinced King Ahasuerus to sign a decree ordering the death of all Jews, men, women, children, and the elderly, on a single day. To gain the king's support, Haman even offered a large sum of money to the royal treasury. Trusting Haman, the king gave him his royal signet ring, allowing the decree to be sealed and sent to all the provinces of the empire. When Mordecai discovered Haman's terrible plan, he went to Esther and asked her to speak with the king to save the Jewish people. However, Esther knew that appearing before the king uninvited was very dangerous, as it could cost her life. Even so, Mordecai reminded her that perhaps God had made her queen precisely for that moment, to help her people. Until then, King Ahasuerus did not know that Esther was Jewish or that Haman's decree affected her people. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Esther asked all the Jews to fast for 3 days before she took any action. Filled with courage and faith, she decided to risk her life and approach the king. After the 3 days of fasting, Esther dressed in her royal robes and went to the inner court of the palace. King Ahasuerus, seated on his throne, saw Esther from afar and, to her relief, extended the golden scepter, signaling that she could approach. The king asked what she wanted and said he was willing to grant her request, even offering half the kingdom. Esther, acting wisely, did not reveal the problem immediately. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. During the banquet, Esther asked the king to attend another banquet the next day, again with Haman. Haman was very proud to have been invited and returned home full of vanity. boasting to his friends and family about the importance and prestige he had in the kingdom. However, Haman's hatred for Mordecai and the Jews only grew. His family suggested that he build a gallows that very night to hang Mordecai. Haman thought the idea was excellent and was already planning to request the king's authorization the next day. But something unexpected happened. That night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep and asked for the kingdom's records to be read to him. Among the accounts, the king heard the story of how Mordecai had saved his life by uncovering a conspiracy to kill him. That same night, as Haman prepared to request Mordecai's execution, the king, curious, asked what reward Mordecai had received for his loyalty. Upon learning that he had never been honored, the king decided to correct this. He called Haman and, without mentioning Mordecai's name, asked what should be done to honor a man whom the king wished to reward. Haman, thinking the king was referring to him, suggested a grand honor. Dressing the honoree in royal robes and leading him through the city in a parade, announcing his importance. To his complete surprise and humiliation, the king ordered him to do exactly that for Mordecai, the man he hated most. Haman was forced to lead the parade, loudly proclaiming Mordecai's deeds, while his anger and shame grew even greater. After this humiliation, Haman returned home devastated, but had no time to lament. The king's officials soon arrived to take him to the second banquet organized by Queen Esther. During the banquet, Esther revealed to the king that she was Jewish and explained that her people were about to be exterminated because of a conspiracy devised by Haman. Upon hearing this, the king became furious and went out to the palace garden to calm himself. Meanwhile, Haman, completely desperate, began pleading with Queen Esther for his life. When the king returned, he saw Haman fallen near the couch where Esther was seated and interpreted it as an act of disrespect or even a threat against the queen. This was enough for the king to decide Haman's fate. The king's servants covered Haman's face, a sign that he was condemned to death. He was then executed on the very gallows he had ordered to be built for Mordecai, thus ending his plot against the Jewish people. Since the king could not revoke the decree condemning the Jews to death, Queen Esther convinced him to create a new decree. This new decree gave the Jews the right to defend themselves and eliminate anyone who tried to attack them. With this permission, the Jews defeated their enemies and destroyed Haman's family. Esther also obtained the king's authorization to extend the fight for one more day in the city of Susa, which shows how strong the hatred against the Jews was in that place. In total, more than 75,000 enemies of the Jews were defeated. The decree allowed the Jews to take the possessions of their enemies, but they chose not to take anything. This can be understood as a symbolic choice, contrasting with King Saul's actions when he took spoils from the Amalekites, something that had severe consequences for him. This is how the celebration of Purim was established, a feast that Jews continue to celebrate today to remember how God delivered them from what seemed like an impossible situation. They survived a decree that seemed irreversible. Over time, many people have questioned whether Queen Esther truly existed, as there are no records of her outside the Bible. Even some scholars have struggled to accept the Book of Esther as part of the Scriptures. However, certain details in the text, such as the customs of the Persian court in Susa and Xerxes' campaigns against the Greeks, align well with what is described in the book. The story of Esther invites us to reflect on how God orchestrates everything according to His plan, even when He seems absent. The Book of Esther is unique because it does not mention God's name or depict grand miracles. Yet, it is clear that God is guiding every situation, using even the simplest events to fulfill His purposes. From Vashti's removal to Esther's coronation as Queen of Persia, everything seemed to be mere political or social matters. But when we look closer, we realize that each decision and event was part of a greater plan, directed by God to save the Jewish people. Esther's selection, Mordecai's courage, King Ahasuerus' sleepless night, and even Haman's arrogance, all were used by God to accomplish his plans. This story also teaches us something important for our own lives. How many times do we feel that God is distant or that nothing special is happening? Perhaps we do not witness grand miracles or hear God's voice clearly, but the story of Esther reminds us that God is always present, working behind the scenes. Even in silence, his hand guides everything, turning simple moments into opportunities to fulfill his purposes. Esther's courage inspires us to trust in God, even when it requires sacrifices or involves risks. She could have chosen the comfort of being queen and ignored what was happening to her people. Instead, she put her life in danger, showing unwavering faith and incredible wisdom by acting cautiously and seeking God's guidance through fasting and prayer. Moreover, the story of Esther reminds us of the importance of praying for others and being available for God to use us in his plans. Even when we face moments of uncertainty or feel inadequate in the face of challenges, God can use our lives in ways we never imagined, giving purpose and value to every situation. Now tell me, were you already familiar with the story of Esther? If you enjoyed this content, share it with someone who doesn't yet know this wonderful story. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like to help this video reach more people, and may God bless you.